So in this video, I'm going to be reflecting on how my running year for 2021 has gone. And I just wanted to start off by saying a massive thank you to everyone who commented on my video last week. And that was my final race of the year, the Hurtwood 50K. And also to everyone who gave support in the run up to the race. It was quite a grueling race in the end, but to have people's words of encouragement, that made a huge difference. So thank you very much. If anyone hasn't seen it already, then I'll post the link below in case you want to check it out. And I'll also post the links for all the other races I'm going to talk about in today's video below as well, if you want to go back and have a look at those. The thing I would say to begin with about running in 2021 for me is that overall I was really pleased with it, particularly in comparison to my running year for 2020, which was pretty crap overall. And that was really because last year I was coming off the back of an injury. So in November 2019, I tore a ligament in my ankle playing football, and it meant that I wasn't running for about 4.5 months. And then after that, I was doing physio, so for the majority of last year. And then very, very slowly kind of getting back into running. I was going out doing things like maybe half an hour on feet, but then running for a minute, then walking for 9 minutes, running for a minute, walking for 9 minutes. And then for the next run, it would be 2 minutes running, 8 minutes walking, etc. So it's very, very slow progress. By September last year, I managed to be able to run a 5K without stopping and without pain. So I managed to get back up through the physio and the kind of walk-run strategy to a 5K by September last year. And then by the end of last year, I was able to get up to 10 miles as a distance without stopping. But it felt a real slog last year. So in contrast, this year has been great in terms of it being the year that I've got into trails, I've got into marathon running and ultra running. And I couldn't have conceived last year that I would be in this position and that I would be able to do this, because I thought that my ankle was just going to be giving me grief indefinitely. I thought it would just be going on and on in the background. But thankfully this year, it hasn't given me any trouble. And I've stuck to the physio very carefully just to make sure I'm still building strength in it and ensuring it's continued to develop. But yeah, overall, it's been really, really great. So I started off this year, I'm just looking at my list of things up here that I've done. So I started off this year by training for my first marathon, which was in April this year. Initially, I'd signed up to the Brighton Marathon for April 2020, so April last year. It got postponed, which was actually good for me because I was in no position to be able to run the race at that time with my ankle injury. So early this year, I was training for the marathon. January 23rd this year, I did my first half for a long time. So it wasn't until this year, which actually went beyond the half distance, but in January I thought I'd do a timed half. I managed to come out with 1:38.52, which was a real confidence boost after the ankle injury. And I thought, okay, the marathon is on here. And then following that, February, I did my longest distance to date. So that was 16 miles. And then I also started trail running in February. I thought, maybe I'll mix it up a bit. I'll do a bit of trails, not only road stuff. And then March, I went up to 20 miles. That was my longest distance that I'd run up until that point. And then April 12th, that was the date that I did my first marathon. And I ran it as a virtual marathon. So there wasn't a race going on at that point because of the various things around lockdown. So I ran it as a virtual marathon. I signed up, and my aim for it was to do sub 3:30. So that was my goal, and I managed to come out in that. And this was the virtual marathon I did it with. So I did it with an organisation called Nice Work. That was the medal for it there. And yeah, I came out in the end. I always do this with my medals, actually. I write on the back like the time, the position, and the date as well, just for kind of memory's sake. So I came out in 3:28.17, so I managed to get my goal. It was a very cold day, so it was 1 or 2 degrees. It started snowing at one point, but actually that was quite good for me because I didn't overheat. It was painful, it was long, it was difficult, but it went smoothly, and I had some kind of bottles stashed that I would pick up on the way, so I wasn't carrying too much on me, and I just did it along Brighton seafront. So I was really pleased with that. The funny thing about this event was that I also got something in the post some weeks later. So this came through the post a few weeks after I did the marathon, which whenever I look at it, I kind of find it funny because I'm not the kind of person who's ever going to win a marathon. But it turned out that 37 people entered, and I ended up getting the fastest time out of those 37 people. So they gave me a first place kind of, I don't know what you call this actually, trophy or some other thing, paperweight maybe. But yeah, I always find that quite funny because I'm definitely not going to be getting a first place at a marathon anytime in the future. I think it had to be virtual. It had to be that only 37 people entered, but I got that in the end. So that was April, and I was really pleased with that to have my first marathon out of the way. And then following that, I had a number of days rest. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 days I took off running. And then in April, I started training for my first ultra. And it was at that point that I found it very liberating going out on the trails because I wasn't so worried about time. Like for the marathon training, because I was training for sub 3:30, I was having to kind of obsess over time and think about, am I doing the right pace? But it was great just to get out and not worry about speed and just consider time on feet, and hence the name of the channel, which I set up a couple of months after that first marathon in April. So it's just because I really enjoyed that feeling of just getting time on feet, going out there for like 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it was, and not worrying about time. So that was April. So started training for the ultra. The longest training run that I did for the ultra was actually in May, and that was 20 miles. So I didn't do anything longer than that. I kind of went off the back of my marathon training there. And then in June, that was when I started this channel. And then also in that month, I did my first ultra. So that was Run to the Sea Brighton. That was this one, which I'd really recommend as a first ultra if anyone's looking for one. Run to the Sea Brighton, organised by Ultraviolet, and yeah, it was a really nicely organised event. It's flat for the first half, quite hilly for the second, but overall it's good for a first one because it's 2,500 feet of elevation, so in the scheme of things not too much, and yeah, it was just a really well organised event. I had thought in the back of my mind for this event that I was going to go for sub 5 hours for 50k ultra, which looking back was completely unrealistic. But I thought, I looked at my marathon, I thought, if I can do it in 3:28, then I could probably do 50k in sub 5 hours. What I hadn't factored in was things like heat, hills, having to stop at aid stations. In the end, I came out in 5:27:44, which I was pleased with. And yeah, it was a good first ultra, really nice atmosphere. So yeah, good first event. So moving on from that, July and August, I was doing some summer runs in Cornwall and Wales because I was away there on holiday. And then I was training for the Brighton Marathon during those months as well. So I had the Brighton Marathon coming up. 28th of August, I managed to do a 5k PB at a Parkrun, which I was really pleased with. Came out in 19:46. It was a bit risky. I wasn't setting out to do a PB, but I thought I'll just try and go as fast as I can and then see what happens, which with a few weeks to the marathon probably wasn't the best idea. It was quite risky. I could have got injured, but I managed to knock a couple of seconds off my previous 5k PB, which was 19:48, and then came out with that. So another kind of goal reached this year, which I was pleased with. 12th of September, that was the Brighton Marathon, and I was aiming for sub 3:30 for that. Didn't quite get there, so I came out in the end with 3:38:43, and yeah, it was a tough day, very tough day, that one. Lots of heat in terms of the water. I found that very difficult with the aid stations because I was drinking like little cups and then not able to get enough down, so I got dehydrated, blew up around the 20-mile mark, and then was very slow around there. So I didn't manage to get sub 3:30, but given the day and given how tricky it was, and the extra 568 metres because it was mismeasured as a course. So given that, then I was pleased with the overall result. So moving on from that Brighton Marathon, then I had the Downslink Ultra, which was at that point which still is to date, my longest distance, so 38 miles. And that was great. I think this is probably my event this year that has gone the smoothest out of all of them. So that was, my A goal for that was to come out in 6.5 hours. And there it is, my Downslink Ultra medal, 6 hours 18:54. So yeah, it's a really nice event, that one, and yeah, the guys who organised it were super, really good. In fact, I'm wearing the t-shirt from it at the moment. So yeah, Sussex Trail Events, really good organisation, and I got chatting to one of the people who subscribes to this channel, Jez, at the end as well, who was working with Sussex Trail Events that day. So that was great to have talks with him, see what he was up to in his running, and just yeah, very supportive atmosphere. So that was great. So that was the Downslink Ultra. Moving to November then, the YHA Southease run, that was the next one I did. I wasn't racing this, so I was running this with Carla. It was her longest distance, so Carla, my partner, was running that as her first trail event, first trail race, and she did really, really well in that. So there's a video about that below as well. And then the final race of this year, so which was very recently, the Hurtwood 50k, and probably my toughest race this year overall. Yeah, I think it would be because I was pushing to get a 5k PB, and also because of the hills. It was the most elevation I'd done, at about 4,000 something feet elevation. But it went really well, and I came out in the end in 5:19.19, position 36 out of 237, which was cherry on the top for the day, like to place well in terms of the field. And yeah, again, just really well organised. That was Freedom Racing who organised that. And yeah, beautiful kind of woodland ultra that was. Yeah, around the Surrey Hills, going over several different hills with amazing views looking out over Surrey and the surrounding counties. So yeah, that was really, really, really good overall. So in terms of my key takeaways from this year, I would say the first thing that I've learned from 2020 going into this year is to be patient with injuries. It can be really difficult. I got quite down in terms of my running last year, thinking that I just wasn't going to be able to go back to running any kind of distance over like 5k. And I thought that I would just be able to do that, and it was something that I really wanted to do more than that. It's for people, it's about what you want to do with your running, and for me, I wanted to try and explore different distances. So I kind of felt I was held back by the injury with that. But I think that's the first thing, just being really patient with injuries. The second thing is that I think the bounds of what you think is conceivable in your running can change very quickly. So if you're someone who's run a kilometre, for instance, and then you think to yourself of running 5k, that can seem like, well, I can't imagine running like 5 times what I'm doing. Or when I ran my first 5k rather, thinking about doing double that as a 10k, I was just like, that seems crazy. But very quickly, as as your body gets used to it and you build your base for running, then you can, if you approach it in the right way, you can, exceed your expectations, I think. And that's really what I've learned, because I couldn't have imagined doing a marathon or an ultra last year. But, going through the process, taking the time, cutting back on the speed as well, then, just making sure you're doing all the right things with recovery, then actually it can change very quickly. And the final thing I suppose I've gained from last year and this year is just being able to access all of the information that's out there has been amazing. Like YouTube has been a great resource in terms of hearing from other people who've either done the same races or been, upping the distance or upping mileage in some way or adding an elevation, and all of the tips and the tricks that they share have been really, really useful. And that's partly really why I wanted to start the channel, just to share what I was learning as I was going through this process. And it's not that, I watch other people's stuff and I take it as gospel, and I want people to do the same with the stuff that I put out there really as well. It's just that this I find has worked for me, and it might work for others too, or it might give you food for thought or other things to think about. So I found that really useful in terms of hearing about what others have to say. So I hope the stuff that I put out there others find useful, at least in some part too. So those are my reflections on how 2021's running has gone. Following this, I'm going to be talking about how I'm approaching 2022, the key races I've got coming up, key goals, but I'll save that for a later video. So thanks very much for tuning in, everyone, and I shall speak to you all very soon.